It's here, guys. You clicked on it. Rabbi Paysach Krohn, one of the busiest people on planet Earth. But we had the schus of having him in our temporary office because our studio is
very hot.
Yeah.
Air conditioning broke. Shout out to our office building. But we just had an incredible hour with Rabbi Paysach Krohn, who you may have grown up to listening to his stories, to his speeches. He may have been the mohel at your bris or your son's or your brother, whoever it is. He somehow probably has impacted your life in one way or another. And just getting to know him, what his schedule looks like, the stories that tug at his heart, and the things that motivated him to be who he is. It was just pretty amazing.
Yeah, we mentioned it. He's so real. He's so genuine. He loves Klal Yisrael, and you'll see why he does. And he talks about how he got to the point of where he is. And
he's very likable.
He's so
like
likable.
You said, yeah.
He's lovable. He really is. He's very Zeus. And he
just called him Zeus.
I know, but I don't want to take away from his covet. He's also a tremendous Talmid Chacham and tremendous just big yid.
There's so much to learn from him. Like even with the thing he does with his grandkids every Friday, which I'm not going to say what it is, but if you're a grandparent or if you're a grandchild, this is something that maybe implement in your life, and then you got to listen to the whole thing.
Yeah, and once again, this podcast is powered by AMR Pharmacy. They are the best at what they do, and you're going to hear a little more about them.
We're so excited to have them partnered with us right now with this podcast. You're going to be hearing a lot of their name, so just get it down. AMR Pharmacy, based out of Lakewood, New Jersey.
But New York, New Jersey. You'll hear a little more about them very soon. Welcome to the Meaningful People Podcast, the podcast where we talk to people who are
meaningful.
Yeah, that sounds good.
We're excited to have Rabbi Paysach Krohn all the way from Queens. Although you were in Muncie this morning doing a bris.
I did a bris yesterday, and I just went to visit the baby today.
Oh, very nice. Do you do that every time after bris? You have to go back the next?
Usually, but if there is a nurse there or there might be another male that lives close by, I might have him do that, but take off the dressing, or my son or my son-in-law.
Right.
But usually if I can provide that service, I do that.
It's a lot of traveling.
It's a lot of traveling, and you how many, do you even know the number, how many brises you've done?
Well, I'll tell you, many people ask me that question, and there's a very interesting Gemara that I always try to abide by. And that Gemara says, Ein habrocha metzuya elo bedova hasamah min ayin. Bracha is only found by those things that are hidden. So although I know that I've done thousands and thousands of brisin, I've been doing it since 1966, actually.
Wow.
So
we're born in the 90s.
Yeah, right. And I've already, in 2 cases, done 3 generations.
That is
3 generations. So just recently. Because when I first started,
was there a case where the Sandik, you did the Sandik's bris and the baby's bris?
I'm sure. Oh, many times.
That is amazing.
We did 3
and every week or every other week, I surely do the son of a father that I did years ago. Wow. And that's a great experience.
And now your son as well
And now my son, Eliezer, is in Passaic, and my son-in-law, Ephraim, is here in the 5 towns in Far Rockaway.
Wow, so it's a family business.
Yeah, right.
That's
and
amazing.
My father was my grandfather. And so I don't ever count how many brisin I've done, because if it's hidden, that's a siman bracha.
Wow. And so it would also be hard to keep track. I feel
I have a record of every single one.
Really?
You seem like the type that's very organized.
And the reason that I have a record, you wouldn't believe, is because many of the brisin that I've done over the years are people that are not from. And when it comes to their bar mitzvah, they don't even have any recollection what the baby's or the boy's Hebrew name is. So I have a record of everyone, although I give them a certificate at the bris. But, these things get lost, and tragically many times the parents are divorced, so they're not the ones that have the records. And if they're not religious, they wouldn't even remember. In English, it's Justin Scott. What we name him in Hebrew, right?
Right.
Wow.
So you keep a record.
I look up the records.
I
think one of the craziest stories that I ever had was I once got a call from somebody, a chaplain in the Buffalo State Penitentiary, and he wanted to know if I did a bris on this particular fellow. I said, why are you asking? He said, well, we have a guy here in jail who has a Goyish name, like a real Italian name, and he claims he's Jewish. And on Shabbos, when I was here, the chaplain said, I had a special shalosh shudas for the Jewish people that were here, Nebuch, the inmates, and he wanted to join. I said, what do you mean, with a name like you, you're not Jewish? He said, call my mother, you'll see. So he said, I called his mother, and she said, yeah, Rabbi Krohn did the bris. She was married to a guy, but she was Jewish, and this guy was Jewish. He was, unfortunately, the head of a car theft ring.
A good, yeah.
I don't think you're responsible for that.
No, I hope not.
Wow.
But he wanted to know, and I looked it up, and sure enough, I did the bris.
Do you ever mix, the fact that you do so many bris on people that aren't from, do you ever mix Kiriv with doing
Yes, I'll tell you one of the most beautiful, touching stories that I ever had. I remember the first time that I went to the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and somehow we walked in through the side where Yaakov was buried. So I davened by Yaakov, and then I davened by Yitzchak. And then when I davened by Avram Avinu, I just fell apart. I just started crying. I couldn't stop. And the reason was because I realized, well, Avram Avinu, Avram our father, and he was a mohel, and my father was named Avram. So there was like a connection. Avram Avinu, my father was a mohel. But Avram Avinu, if you think about it, was the first Kiriv professional, right? He was Makar of Yidden, or he was Makar of actually the Goyim, to show them that there was Hashem. So, and I always try to do that at a non-frum bris. Now, when I come to a frum bris, I don't really speak unless they ask me to stay for the Suda, but I usually don't. But by the non-frum people, you would not believe this, it's almost like my goal to bring them to tears. And the way I do that is that I usually have the father or the mother speak before the bris about who the baby's going to be named after. And that sets a tone of such seriousness. All of a sudden, this father is speaking about his grandfather who he loved. And it's such an emotional exchange. He begins to cry, and all the relatives are crying. Or the mother is speaking. She's speaking about, a grandmother who they're transposing the name, or an aunt or an uncle that she was close to. And all of a sudden, it lends a different aura. So when you have that feeling at a bris, they realize it's a religious occasion, it's a holy occasion, and then there's no off-color jokes. It's a different attitude. So there's definitely, by a non-frum bris, there's an amount of Kiriv that you really can do, and I try to do that.
That's really beautiful.
It is beautiful. I love doing those brissen. I tell you, I love them.
Do you cry yourself by those brisses?
Sometimes a father or a mother will talk about, I will never ever forget about a bris that I had in Manhattan. These people were not religious whatsoever. And this father got up to speak. His speech was so impressive. And remind me to tell you about the speech of yesterday in Muncie. Mm-hmm. That was a frum guy who said something that was amazing.
You seem like you have a lot of stories.
16 books.
Yeah, that's right. So what happened was he said that when I was a child, this guy's non-frum guy speaking, right? It's in a very fancy hotel in Manhattan. He says, when I was young, my parents robbed my childhood from me because my parents, my in-laws, my grandparents on both sides didn't get along with each other. And so therefore we could never visit both sides. It was very, very difficult. It was like the Hatfields and the McCoys. Now, I didn't know what Hatfields and McCoys was because I don't have a television.
I still don't.
So,
I don't know what it is.
No. So it seems that there was a television show where two families were killing each other. And listen what this guy did. You wouldn't believe it. He said, because it was like the Hatfields and McCoys who didn't get along with each other, and my grandparents on one side and grandparents on the other side didn't get along with each other, it's time for closure. So I'm going to name the baby after both grandfathers to bring them together.
Wow.
I tell you, people were just bawling because they knew about this and they never realized how it affected this grown man as a child, that he was robbed of part of his childhood. It was incredible. Now, yesterday, the fellow in Muncie, he asked such a good question. I just couldn't believe it. He said that, we're standing here in Tammuz, was there Chodesh Tammuz? Mm-hmm. And he said, we know that Cheshvan is called Mar Cheshvan because there are no holidays in it. You know, in Nisan you have Pesach, and in Sivan you have Shavuos, Elul, and Cheshvan. He said, well, there's nothing in Tammuz. So why isn't it called Mar Tammuz? Right? Never thought about that.
Yeah, I like that.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we have Shavasa, but Tammuz.
That's not exactly a holiday.
Right.
Exactly. So, you know, then he went on to speak about that. So, you know, it's always interesting when you have them speak.
So I want to delve into how you got started as a mohel. Was it? I know your father passed away when you were very
and that
young.
was a very tragic situation. I was only 21. I was in the Yeshiva Torvadas, and my father was a full-time mohel. He was at Long Island Jewish Hospital and Booth Memorial Hospital. Very active mohel, very busy, and unfortunately, he got Yana Machla. He had lung cancer, and here I was 21. And I realized that if he passes away, I got to take over. Now, he had always taken me in the summertime, you know, to teach me bris milah.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not sure when I was growing up that I was going to be a mohel. But he said to me, listen, you've got to learn how to be a mohel, because only then will you have a choice whether you could do it or not do it.
Right, that's
But
good.
if you don't know it, you won't have that choice. And he was very wise. He was the wisest man I ever met in my life. He was so perceptive. And so I would walk with him Shabbosim, and those were the days before people had Erevin, you know, in Forest Hills or Queens or whatever. So you wouldn't believe it. What we would do, my father, he would write the address on the bottom of his shirt tail.
Oh, really?
Right. And that's how he knew where we had to go, because he couldn't carry
so
the
funny. That's
piece of
creative.
paper. You know, so when we walked to Forest Hills, you know,
People
on
can still do that.
Yellowstone Boulevard,
People can still do that
right?
today.
Right, you can still do it today. You know, but we just hoped that the cleaners would clean it off, because he'd go to the wrong bris next week. Right.
Has it ever happened?
So you're 21 years old when he passed away.
I'm 21 years old, right?
One of 7
I'm the
children?
oldest of 7, right?
Wow.
And then he passed away on Shmini Atzeres, and unfortunately, you know, by already June 66, he passed away in October, but in June 66 already, he couldn't do it anymore. And that's when I started. And
Yeah, is that what you did you want to be a mohel? It seems like you were, you know, to take responsibility for your family. It's something that you were trained in as. If things played out differently, is there a certain career or something else that you'd want to have been?
I mean, the first thing that I always thought was that I was going to be the first Jewish ball player to play
Oh my
center
gosh.
field for the Brooklyn Dodgers. That was, you know, I was going to try to figure out how could I not play on Shabbos.
The center field for the Brooklyn Dodgers would have been Rabbi Eitan Feiner. In left
really?
field, or Moshe Weimerger.
Are you
And in
serious?
right field, or Paysach Krohn.
Not right field, center field, because I love Duke Snyder. Is that what they said?
I think Rabbi Feiner thought he was going to be the Dallas Cowboys quarterback.
Wow.
We're seeing a theme with
The theme
all
is,
the
let me
people we're
guess,
having.
do you also want to be a lawyer?
No.
Okay,
no,
so-
no,
okay,
no,
so-
no, I was into ball play. And if I couldn't be center field, I'd play shortstop, whatever.
Okay.
But, you know, that's what I did in camp. You know, mostly shortstop or center field or whatever. And the greatest thing that ever happened to me was the Brooklyn Dodgers moved out of Brooklyn. That's when I started learning seriously.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Maybe that's why I shouldn't
In
did it.
57.
They have major schosim, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
Back to then. How was it for your mother? Was
Oh, it was very difficult. She was very strong, but she was very difficult. It was very difficult for her because
She was young. She was a young woman.
Yeah, she was a young woman. She was, you know, my
7.
father was 47, so she was, you know, about that age as well.
7 children.
Yeah, 7 children, and she was not working. You know, she was home with the kids, and then you know, it was very difficult for me to, you know, to pick up the slack, so to speak. You know, a lot of people who didn't realize that my father had passed away would call for Rabbi Krohn, and I would say, I'm Rabbi Krohn, and they say, you sound very young. And I will never, ever forget, ever. This is probably one of the worst moments of my life. One of the worst moments. I'll never forget, in Forest Hills. Some guy was expecting my father to show up, and I came with a bris bag, and he took a look at me. He said, you are not touching my son. Go home.
This is when you were 21?
Yeah, I was probably 21, 22 or whatever.
Talk about getting knocked down. You
Yeah,
know?
wow.
And this is like your father just
Had died.
Just
he had just
recently
died.
died.
Yeah, right,
And
a year before. Maybe
I guess
was 22
there's
or
no
whatever.
yeshiva world then. People don't
but I
find
was-
out about these
but
things.
you know, I was a kid, obviously, you know, and the guy was under the impression my father was going to show up, and I showed up, and you know, listen, maybe I can't blame him. You know, he was, you know, a young father. You know, I looked inexperienced. I mean, I didn't have that much experience, although I did have a lot of hospital training and I had done many brisim by then already, but that was awful. That was just awful. But I had the greatest mother in the world. I always tell the story that when I would come home, either from yeshiva or from another bris, and I would ask her, I say, Ma, are there any calls? And she would say, not yet. And those two words were so fabulous, because what it meant was, not yet, but I have confidence. One day there are going to be so many people calling you won't even know what to do first.
And now it doesn't stop ringing.
Right? Yeah, it's true. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I have a driver. I can't possibly be driving and answering the phone all the time. You know, it's especially today with so many different people are calling with so many different things besides bris milah. But, you know, it really, once I began speaking and once I really began writing very seriously, there was so many involvements and so many things. It was just impossible. It would have been dangerous.
So at what point did you start speaking? Did you get into it? Was it before?
What happened? What happened was that I was a mohel, I would say, you know, like I said, from 1966, and, you know, Ad Hayom Hazeh, Baruch Hashem. And when ArtScroll came out in 1976 with Megillas Esther, see, I always enjoyed writing. When I was a kid, my mother was a fabulous writer, fabulous. But she was, in a sense, born too early. There was no Jewish writers, you know, at that time when she was growing up. And but we always discussed writing. In those days, you were able to read the New York Times. You know, the New York Times was not considered an anti-Semitic paper. And I still remember when I was in Camp Aguda. It's hard to believe this, and I don't know why I'm telling it to you, but, you know, this is a place
You're
where...
You're telling it to a lot of people.
Yeah, I realize, you know, this is being open.
It's just us.
It's just us. No, you know, 'cause I see these interviews are really just beautiful. And by the way, for me to be sitting here where Rabbi Weinberger, Moshe Weinberger, and Rabbi Bender and Rabbi Eitan find us at is a tremendous covet. I thank you for having me.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure.
These guys are superstars. But when I was a counselor in Camp Aguda, I had the New York Times delivered to me every day. Because I always read the editorials and always the op-ed pages. And my mother and we used to underline great expressions. And I believe I learned writing from her, but I learned writing from, you know, the op-ed and the editorials of the New York Times, which, you know, obviously today, it's not the same.
Schusim count, Brooklyn Dodgers, New York Times. Big time, like really.
No. It's, you know, today I read the Wall Street Journal because, you know, they're much more friendly and open to Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
You know, it's...
there's a story about a teacher telling you something very discouraging. Could you tell us a little more about that?
What happened was that actually he taught in the 5 towns. He was a great guy. His name was Hyman Ozer. I mean, he was our favorite teacher. He was a great, great English teacher, you know, composition and things like that. And one night, my mother came to PTA, and Mr. Ozer said to my mother, Mrs. Krohn, your son is a good writer, but he'll never write a book. And she was like, why would I even think that my son's writing a book? He's a 9th grader, right? You know, he's 14 years old. So she said, why do you say he wouldn't write a book? He says, he's too religious. Nobody will ever read what he writes. So I'm sure that he forgot about it by the time the next parent came in. And my mother didn't forget about it. She came home and told me, and I certainly didn't forget about it. So many, many years later, now that was in probably 1960, right? Because I graduated high school in 62. So maybe that was 1960. And in 1985, when the Maggid of Jerusalem came out, I went looking for him. I wanted to see if he was still alive. And there was a guy here, Mitch Mann, who worked in the teachers union. So I knew for sure he had a twin brother, Jerry and Mitch. They both lived around here. Great guys. And I said to him, is Mr. Ozer still around? And they found out, he was teaching in Hafta. He was the head of the English department.
How old are you when this was happening?
So I was already, 40, something like that.
Okay.
I think so. And I called him up. I said, Mr. Ozer, do you remember me? My name is Paysach Krohn. You remember you taught in Torah Das? He said, yeah, I had some great years there. I said, do you remember me? He said, I think I remember your name. I said, I have a gift for you. When can I bring it? He said, you got a gift? You can come tomorrow. So I drove out here to Hafta, right? It was right on Washington Avenue. And I told him, I said, Mr. Ozer, there's no way that you could possibly remember this, but you told my mother that I would never write a book, and I just want to show you. I just wrote The Maggid Speaks, which is between 95 and 100 short stories, and I want to give you the book, and I want to autograph it. Well, the guy went crazy. He comes out of his big desk, puts his arm around me, and he says, come with me. Takes me into one of his classes. He says, boys, I want to show you a former student of mine. He just wrote a book, and I taught him how to write.
That's great.
And what happened, we became such close friends from that story, I can't tell you, that when he retired, I was the guest speaker at his retirement dinner.
Really?
Yeah, he loved me. And every book that comes in, I still send it to him.
Really?
Yeah, he lives in Florida now. We're very close.
Wow. So you didn't get discouraged from him.
No.
Maybe the opposite. He
Well, I don't know if it was the opposite, but I remember Rabbi Beryl Wine should be well. He's fabulous, fabulous. What he's produced in this world, he's the guy that you got to get here. He's from the meeting.
He's on our list.
Yeah, ask Rabbi Teitelbaum, his son-in-law, when he comes. He's fabulous. So he once told me, I once asked him, I said, how do you take it, people criticize you? He said, let me tell you something. If you are going to worry about people who criticize you, you will never accomplish anything in this world. And it's true. If you believe that something is right, you got to go with it. You can't worry about what people are going to say.
But how do you people, I guess there are emotions. Someone says to you, when you walked in when you were 21 years old and that person said, you're not touching my son, I'm sure it was crushing.
Yeah, it was crushing.
How do you go ahead and do the next one?
Well, yeah, it's almost chas v'shalom, not to compare, but I remember I was once in a car accident. A guy came out of nowhere and just, hit me as I was going through an intersection. And how do you get into the car right afterwards? Right.
It's the same. It's the same. Someone gets up there and speaks publicly and they choke. Yeah. How are they going to get up there again? Right. It takes a lot of work.
Right. It does. Yeah. You just have to just block it out and just do what you have to do, because if you let it sit and fester, you'll never accomplish. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you got here today by car, so you went into a car after that eventually.
Oh, of course. That was so many years ago.
Right. I know, but at that moment you were scared, and then
you're scared, but you have to block it out.
I want to ask you about. You mentioned how your father was someone who had a big impact on your life, and obviously your relationship with your mother. Who else has been a role model in your life that you look up to?
The pasuk says, the Mishnah Novi says, "Aseh lecha Rav," and I think that every person has to have a Rav, a Rebbe, or Rosh Yeshiva. Mm-hmm. And Rabbi Bender mentioned that in that part of the interview that I listened. He said every person has to have a Rebbe, and even a Rebbe has to have a Rebbe. That was a nice expression. And I think that people have to have different Rebbeim for different things. And one of the Rebbeim that I have, probably my main Rebbe, is Rabbi David Cohen. And I've been learning with him literally maybe 40 years, every single week, at least 2 hours. It's
every week.
Over
your phone?
No, I try to go there. Now, since Corona, we've only learned over the phone. Mm-hmm. And last week was the last week because he's going up to Camp Monk. But every person has to have a Rebbe, and he has been my connection to Har Sinai, no question about it. I think every person has to have a Rebbe that they feel is their connection to Har Sinai. And whether you're a Rav or a Balabas or a woman or whatever, you got to have somebody that you could ask that you feel is authoritative. And that's the answer to your question before. Like, how do you go on when somebody is crushing you? If you have a Rebbe and the Rebbe understands you, he'll tell you what you're doing is right or what you're doing is wrong. And if he tells you what you're doing is right, you just go on, because that's what you follow.
I don't want to mess up his name. Rav Sholom Schwadron. Rav Sholom. I messed it up.
Okay, don't worry.
I'm like, don't say Schwadroni. I'm like, no, I messed it up. So
no. Rav Sholom Schwadron was the Maggid of Jerusalem, and there's a fabulous, fabulous story how we got to know him. I'm writing now another book. I had written Haggadah, Baruch Hashem, and it came out, and it was very, very successful. It just happened to come out before Purim, before this whole thing started. And then after Purim, there were many people that realized they're going to be at the Seder alone. And so they were buying ArtScroll. Was just reprinting and reprinting and reprinting. It was amazing. I don't even know if they ever sold as many Haggadahs certainly
This
not
is
in
your
the most
first
recent years.
Haggadah?
Yeah.
That's Hashgacha Pratis.
Yeah, that was Hashgacha Pratis.
Yeah,
like
So far, it sounds like your whole entire life is Hashgacha Pratis.
Yeah. Like my wife said, when the Corona came out, we figured nobody's going to buy. All the stores are closed. But ArtScroll moved to Rahway, New Jersey recently.
Yeah.
And Governor Murphy let them stay open much longer than the other places. And again, that was Hashgacha.
And they just moved.
They just moved, right? And what happened was that they printed thousands and thousands and thousands. And Rabbi Feiner here in New York and Rabbi Shapiro in Miami, they gave him out to all those almanas and all the women that were going to be alone. They gave him the Haggadah. And there were women who told me, they wrote me letters, I'm telling you, I was crying. They said, Rabbi Krohn, this was the greatest Seder. I thought it was going to be the worst. I sat with you and Hashem at the Seder, and I was up till 2:30 both nights. I couldn't stop reading it. I just felt you were right there with me. Because what I did was, and that's what I'm doing now for Elul, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, not this year, next year, but we're working on it. Each piece had a story. Kamat, every piece. Now, it wasn't a translation and it wasn't a commentary on the piece itself. But if the theme, whatever the theme was, then I used the story. And that's what I'm doing now with Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Elul. Like, for example, one of the al-Chaitz is on haughtiness. So I've got a great story about haughtiness.
Wow.
Another story that I just wrote the other day. It was very, very interesting. There was a Rosh Yeshiva in Hebron. His name was Rabbi Chatzkel Sarna. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham, and every year in the Hebron Yeshiva, he would get Maftiyona. Now, the last year of his life, a Talmud who was there told me that he couldn't come to shul, even though he lived right across the street. He just couldn't come. So his grandson wanted that he should still get Maftiyona. So what they did was they had a whole group of Bachrim that came, and they made a minyan for Mincha, and they set up like a makeshift bima, and they took his bed, they put it by the bima in his house, and there was a Sefer Torah there. Rabbi Chatzkel Sarna had a Sefer Torah, and they laned, and he made the bracha from bed, and then they read Maftiyona. Now, after Mincha, the guys were picking up the Machzerim, and they were getting back to go across the street for Nila. And he said, guys, please stay. And they wanted to be, everybody wants to be in the yeshiva for Ne'ilah, right? That's the high point of davening. So listen to what he said to them. This guy, this Talmud who was there, told me the story. He said, listen, Chevra, I just want to tell you something. If you stay here with me and you daven Ne'ilah with me, every second that you are here, you're going to be Makayim, the mitzvah of Yahavta L'Recha Kamocha, because Bikkur Cholim is part of the mitzvah of Yahavta L'Recha Kamocha. If you go back to daven in the yeshiva, the most that you'll have is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan davening with a minyan. So wouldn't you rather have the mitzvah d'Oraisa of staying with me? And that's what they did.
Wow.
So then I added to that story something that happened with me a number of years ago. I was, my wife is from Denver, Colorado, and she was with her mother in Denver with the kids, for part of the summer. And I was going to go from New York right after Tisha B'Av, to fly in to meet her and spend the vacation there. But it occurred to me, I'm going after Tisha B'Av, but, when you go from New York to Denver, you could stop in Cleveland. I could be in Tells for Tisha B'Av. Wouldn't that be great? To be in a yeshivish atmosphere, the Rosh Yeshivas and Kinnis would be so inspirational. And that's what I was planning to do. I was going to fly to Cleveland, be there because I had a sister and a brother-in-law there. And then I got a call for a bris on Tisha B'Av in New York. So what do? Do I do the bris milah and then fly to Denver right after Tisha B'Av? Or do I give up the bris and I should go to Tells, for inspirational Tisha B'Av? Don't you want to be inspirational, kinnis and everything? And I called Rabbi David Cohen. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, what do you mean? He said, how could you give up a mitzvah? It's a mitzvah d'oraisa to do a bris milah. You'll find a shul in New York where you'll be inspired. You can't leave the opportunity for a bris milah. So that was the same thing what Rabbi Chatzkel was saying. If you have an opportunity to do a mitzvah d'oraisa, that's the priority. And that's what happens when you have a Rebbe. All of a sudden you're living a different type of life. And so, these are the type of stories that I would put in a booklet.
We'll get back to this episode in just a second. We're just going to give you a few words from our awesome sponsor, the company that's powering these episodes. Give it up for AMR
pharmacy. Nachi, I wanted to say it together with
He always cuts me off.
I wanted to say it with you. It wasn't a cutting off thing.
I don't do that stuff. AMR Pharmacy. It's the pharmacy of the future. It's the only pharmacy you'll ever need. And why is that, Yaakov?
Okay, first of all, this is for any single person living in New York, New Jersey. They have reps all around. They could service you. Have you ever waited in a big pharmaceutical corporation company? I don't want to say because Lashon Hara, and they're just not ready, or they say, oh, it's going to be ready in 3 hours. And you're like, I needed this medication 2 days ago.
I feel like a pharmaceutical corporation is different than what a pharmacy is.
Yeah,
though.
that's totally the wrong language.
If you're waiting in a pharmacy,
let's say I'm going to make up numbers. ZBS. I don't know.
yeah,
like-
you're waiting in ZBS.
ZBS.
You go there and they're like, Schwartz for some sensitive naming prescription that you need every single month. Why go through that?
Yeah,
you don't need
it's
that.
annoying.
You don't need that.
AMR, what they do is you speak to the rep. They get to understand what your needs are, whether it's over-the-counter drugs or medications that
Under
you
the
need,
counter?
under the counter, or it's stuff that you need weekly or monthly. They're king of that, and they understand what you need, and sometimes they do the legwork. They speak to the doctor on your behalf, and they get it to your door. They deliver it to you. Okay, so there's no waiting on lines anymore. You get it before you need it. A week before. Okay, boom. You have all your sensitive medications that you don't want anyone else knowing about. They take care of you really to the utmost.
All you got to do is call 848-222-1110. That's 848-222-1110. Or head to AMR Farm. That's AMRPHARM
RX.com.
RX.
So let's say that again. AMRFarmRx.com. AMRPHARMRX.com. Check them out. If you speak to them on the phone and say, hey, meaningful people, and they'll be like, what? What are you talking about? No, they'll know.
They'll know what you're talking about.
And they'll throw something special. But that's not a reason why to switch to them because they're going to get something special. You should switch to them because they are the only pharmacy that you'll ever need.
And because Hashem loves them, guys, enjoy the rest of the episode. When do you have time to write? Let's say you're doing Brisson like every day. You're speaking places. Is there like a quiet room that you go into and you start writing?
No, I start writing at 10:30 at night. Now, until very recently, I would be up till 1:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning. Now,
Over there?
Almost, yeah. What happens? I take a power nap between 7 and 7:30, and I'm in such a deep sleep between 7 and now it's like 5 to 5:30.
So no one should call you from 7 to 7:30.
Well, they can. I wouldn't even hear it. My wife takes the phone.
This guy's trying to reach you for like 8 months.
Yeah.
He's calling at 7:15 every day.
No, so and then I'm fully rested, and then I've got to take calls. Calls are coming in till 10:30, quarter to 11. But that's really when I could start writing, uninterrupted.
Really?
But now obviously I've got to get more sleep. As you get older, you need a little bit more sleep. So I mean that's why I have a driver. I have a driver because not only the phone, I do a lot of the writing in the car. The thought process.
You write
a lot of
pen to paper? Or you
I write pen to paper, but then mostly it's on the computer.
Mm-hmm.
But just certain thoughts will be on my. I have something over there. I'll show you if you bring me my bag. If you could open the zipper, I'll show you a book.
Bag?
No, the middle one.
Okay.
Yeah. See the big thick book there? I'll show you something that I designed myself.
Is it black?
It's red on the outside.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, now watch it. No, not that. That's a folder.
I don't want to pull out your Mila knife.
No.
No, I'm going to bring the whole bag there.
Yeah.
So
okay.
I don't take the wrong thing
Okay.
over
Let me
here.
just show you. I'll show you something. If you could hold this a second.
For those listening, Rabbi Krohn is going through his bag with. It looks like I would say he's a writer. That's for sure. It's a lot of papers. Oh. You could.
This is called my busy book.
It literally says busy.
For those who are listening.
Okay,
not,
now,
yeah.
and it has 3 A's on it. It's all my design. Accomplish, achieve, and attain. That's my goal in life, to accomplish, achieve, and attain. Now, I designed these pages, and this page, on the outside, it says Bris Matters, so I'll write down Bris Matters, Other Matters, and calls that I have to make.
Wow.
Now, what happens
So
is, now when I finish this, I cut out the page, and at the end of the month, I go to Staples, and they print up 30 more pages like this. So these are empty, but these are things that I'm doing.
Pages and pages filled with
tons of stuff that I have to do. Now, these are 4 speeches that I have to put on video. Now, either Zoom, Chickens for Shabbos, I have to write about not speaking in shul. I have to speak in Mexico on Chinuch, and Seattle for the Kollel, and other things.
That's
so, and this book goes with me all over. And I have this in the car. Now, for example, today I was planning, I was working out some ideas that I want to speak about not speaking in shul, because that's now the big thing. Everybody's coming back into shuls. And what should be our approach as we come back to shuls? So I was making some notes, and
I sometimes see when you're speaking. I attended Camp Monk for 15 years. I was your waiter for a few of those.
Of course.
He was a waiter while you attended Monk?
In Camp Monk.
He would come for Shabbos to visit Rav David Cohen.
I'm joking. He wasn't a waiter at that point.
No, not that point. And you would speak there once a summer, and I'd peek over and I'd see your papers.
Note. Yeah.
And there'd be like it'd be color coded.
That's right.
And if anyone who has seen you speak, there's green dots, red dots.
For those listening, Rabbi Krohn just pulled out more papers, and there's
Is there a certain
yellow dots?
Is there a memory?
Yes. No. There's no significance to the color, but let me just show you how every single speech works. When I prepare a speech, and we spoke about this before, I am never nervous when I'm speaking, but I am so nervous when I'm preparing.
Still, you've been doing this for so long. You're still nervous when you prepare.
Of course, because every
Why would you
speech,
prepare though? Because that's not like performance anxiety. That's just, what is it? It's
What do you mean?
like people get nervous when they get up in front of a crowd.
No, I'm
to speak.
prepared. I can't wait to get up there and speak.
So what gets you nervous about preparing?
Because I want to prepare it properly. I want to be able to
But I
be
imagine
sure.
at this point you have a method, it looks like.
I have a method, but it still takes preparation. I'll give you an example. I'll tell you last night about a bar mitzvah that I spoke about. I spoke to in Lakewood. I'll tell you in a second. But so every time when I'm preparing, I'll look up a source and I write it on an index card. And of course, today I've got, over 9,000 cards, Baruch Hashem. What, 9,000? What? Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, for sure. I don't know, 9,000, maybe I'm over-exaggerating, but whatever.
A lot of cards.
Oh, a lot of cards. Now, and then I have the ideas in my head, and I put the cards in a row, and I take a picture of them. So these are a picture of 2 cards, and this is the source. This is the source material, and this is the layout of the speech. So number 1 here is this source, okay? Now, this speech was about making your days count, right? Now, for example, last night, the bar mitzvah boy that I spoke for, he was born during Sfira, and his name is Avraham. And his grandmother and his mother called me and said, we want the theme of the speech to be Vavram Zakein Bo Bayamim, that making every day count, because he was born during Sfira, and that's what it says about Avram, right? So I took out a speech that I gave about making every day count. So now here's number 1. This is the first thing that I was going to speak about, but this is source number 1, okay? And this is a Gemara in Yevamis. And this is source number 2. This is a Maral. But these are all index cards.
So you stay very, very organized that way.
Oh, yes.
Do people do that a lot too when you're going to speak places? Do they say, we want you to say this, we want you to say X, Y, and Z?
Oh, that's when they call. I ask them if there's a specific topic if they want me to speak about. If they don't, so then I'll choose. Now, for example, I've done... I should have brought you my calendar. You wouldn't believe it. I think I've done 45 speeches since Pesach.
Do you know how many you've done since you started speaking?
Also, I don't count them because, as we said before, but it's...
Is that like the same? People don't
thousands.
count their money because...
What?
Do people not count their money?
Yes, exactly. Same thing. That's
Risky.
I'm
probably a billionaire, by the way. I just never counted. You never know.
Exactly.
No, but for example, we were talking about... the topics, the people I'll ask them for the topic. But now, during this corona, one of the most popular speeches, and I give people the option, is keeping and holding on to emunah in difficult times. Now, I've gotten such letters. I gave this speech in England. There were about, a couple hundred people on Zoom. Mm-hmm. And then I spoke there's a woman, someday you got to get a hold of her, Linda Tawil in Panama. Now, this Linda,
Panama.
You must write it down. I'm telling you, she is a superstar. What she does is she arranges for all the Spanish countries. So last week I spoke at the same time in Mexico, Uruguay, Venezuela, Costa Rica, and Panama. I saw on the Zoom over 1,000
Wow.
And she said in each place there were 2 or 3 people. So there were 2,000 people for that speech.
That's amazing.
And
So you get around.
Well,
especially
now virtually you get around.
But pre-corona, you spoken for signing in Daba in South Africa, right?
Yeah,
You travel all around the
all
world.
over the world,
What-
right?
do you
but
have a-
now 2 weeks ago, I was in 3 countries on the same day.
Right.
I was in Los Angeles, West Orange,
That's
and
efficient.
Mexico.
That's efficiency.
Well, I don't know. It's exhausting.
So,
let me tell you
but
that.
pre-corona and Emir Shem will get
Yeah.
back to normal soon. I'm sure you're gonna be back to going around the world eventually.
Yeah, eventually, I guess so.
My question is, first of all, do you have a favorite country to speak in?
Well, I love
Queens is not a country.
speaking in England. I love
England?
it. Oh my gosh!
Really?
The people,
Why?
Because they're the greatest. There, I give for the last 10 years for sure. I speak to over 1,000 people in a shul called the Kinlos, Kinlos, in London, and that's in Elul. It's for PAL, Phone and Learn. It's a whole long story how that got started, but I'll tell you that if you want. And I love going to South Africa, except it's a very, very long
So
trip.
how long is that trip?
It's almost 17 hours. It's crazy.
And you go for signing in Daba.
Yeah,
It's an
well,
organization
yeah,
there
that
they
I've
have
gone once. Yeah, but lately they do it over the video.
over
Yeah,
video.
So
Yeah.
I know in the summers, you've been going to
yeah, to Europe, to places where Yiddishkeit flourished. We've gone to Poland,
To visit
and
Kfarim.
Lithuania. Not only Kfarim, shuls, and places where Yiddishkeit.
And that's a big part
thrived.
of what you do. You do it every summer now.
Right, but now I don't think I'm going to go this year. The guy wants to go to Poland. Just in today's paper, they said that these European countries, they're not going to let Americans come in
Right.
because, they're angry at Trump. He didn't let Europeans come in.
Obama,
typically, what's that experience like for you? Is it the same thing every time for you?
No, it's different because it's always different people. And, when you go to a concentration camp or you go to Reb Meir Shapiro's yeshiva in Lublin, and even though you're saying the same speech that you gave last year, but they are new people, and it's a new impression for these people.
It's probably very emotional.
Yeah, it's very emotional, and you feed off these people. Now, one of the greatest venues, it's not going to happen this year, unfortunately, is the last couple of years I've been in the Binyanei Omah during the 9 days.
Oh, wow.
3,000 women.
Huge in Israel. Yeah.
It's huge. It's just huge. It's unbelievable. And, that's all American, all English-speaking people, Canadians, English, Americans, or whatever. And that's a great, great venue. So I did love traveling to speak. I don't know how I'm going to wear a mask, for 10 hours on a plane.
You might want to pass on that one.
Yeah.
I think everyone who hears you speak, everyone who meets you, know you're just a very genuine and very real person. Someone would say you're emotional.
Very.
And it sounds like you cry sometimes. What's
Sometimes.
What are things that instantly trigger you to cry that you're
That's a very good question, and I can't answer that because it happens by itself. I there's no definition. I just know that I'm very emotional, and if something is extremely sad or extremely emotional in some way, it affects me. It just happens. It's just.
I love how real you are about it, because I like, even me personally,
Yeah.
sometimes there's something I was in camp and something really beautiful happened. I would kind of maybe try to hide my tears because it's it's like a showing of vulnerability.
No. That's what I learned from Rabbi Sholom Schwadron. That's one thing. He cried in public and he laughed in public. And he did not hide his emotions. And I think that when you tell a story and you're so emotionally caught up in it, and, tears come, it's not, a tremendous amount of crying. It's just, tears come and you get choked up. And people in the audience,
Right.
the same thing happens to them.
I feel like I don't know if you're the first. I think you are. But what do I know? You captivated the power of stories. You travel the world telling the most amazing stories, and young and old, you have people just sitting at the edge of the chair, and it's just you really create have such an
Baruch
impact
Hashem.
that
I
way.
mean, I think there are 2 people that really deserve credit for that. One is the Maggid of Jerusalem, Rabbi Sholom Schwadron, and believe it or not, Hanoch Teller is another person that influenced me.
He actually agreed to come on.
Yeah,
on the
he's
show.
great.
He was
Give
my
him-
landlord in Eretz Yisrael.
Oh, yeah.
He's awesome. I mean, he's a great speaker,
Yeah.
writer, and he's also a great landlord.
Great landlord.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
how did he have such a strong
So,
influence on you?
because he wrote a book on stories, Sold, if you remember. He had, first of all, the first thing that he really became famous for was that there was an essay contest contest in Eretz Yisrael. I think it was about writing about Yerushalayim. I'm not sure, but he certainly wrote about Yerushalayim, and he won the contest.
Really?
And he's from guy, and there's writers all over Eretz Yisrael, and he won. And he became known that way, and then he wrote a book on stories. And then it occurred to me, my gosh, this guy's writing a book on stories. I've got access to Rabbi Sholom Schwadron, the greatest stories in the world. And he doesn't speak English, and, the American audience can't appreciate his Yiddish or his Hebrew, certainly not his Yiddish, and that Yiddish is my mother tongue. So I grew up on Yiddish. So I said to Rabbi Sholom, because I'd known him for many years already, why don't we write a book, of your stories? And that's how the Maggid Speaks came out. They were all his stories.
How many Maggid Speak books are there now?
Oh, how many in this series?
Yeah.
There's 9 Maggid books of stories.
It's a lot of stories. I mean, you probably sit down in a doctor's office and you got to at least get 2 stories per visit of anywhere.
Yeah. Well, there's 9 Maggid books, and then there's a book on Bris Milah, and a book on traveling in Lithuania, and 3 books on speeches, and a book on Chesed and the Haggadah. So, it adds up.
There's a lot of books. I know you have 5 children, and Baruch Hashem, you have grandchildren.
Right.
And I know you're very close to your grandchildren.
Right. And by the way, I don't count them. I don't.
Okay, Baruch Hashem.
And I have no idea how many grandchildren I have.
Baruch
That's the
Hashem.
truth.
So
That's incredible.
What do you
I know every single one of them, and I love them, and they love me. But
what do you think about the fact that we live in a generation where, maybe in history we haven't been, in recent history we haven't been living this long, and there's so many people, Baruch Hashem, that from Yidden are growing, and grandparents have a lot of shaykhs to their grandchildren.
if they make an effort.
Okay, what do you mean by that? Are people puttered in a certain way once, haven't finished?
Well, there are many, many people, and even in my own family, not my immediate family, but
Right.
In my extended family, who figured they raise their kids. That's it. Let their children, raise them, and that's not how I look at it. I look at it. My wife and I.
We heard when we called you a couple of days ago, we heard crying in the background. I assumed there must be your grandchildren.
Yeah, well, I wasn't taking care. My wife was, but but I'll tell you one of the greatest things in my life, and I know that this is going for thousands of people, and I just want to give a bracha to everybody who's listening, including you too, of course. One of the greatest things in my life is a Thursday night, 11 o'clock Zaidi conference call. Now, every Thursday night at 11 o'clock, all my children and grandchildren over bar mitzvah and bas mitzvah call me. And we're on a conference line, and I speak for about 15 minutes. Sometimes they'll interrupt, and with a comment or whatever, basically, but they want to hear what's going on in my life, because as you can see, I'm involved in so many different things.
A lot can happen in a week.
Right, that's right. And I prepare. I have a page in my book, and it's called the Zaidi Conference Call. And if I hear something interesting, like, being on this show, I'm going to tell them about it.
I was going to ask you how many are on, but you don't know. You don't know how many grandchildren are on the phone.
Well, my wife, we can see on the conference line, who's on, but I certainly wouldn't count them. I wouldn't count.
But it's good. I want you to promote our podcast to them. Sure.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, for sure.
So you
every Thursday night, and that's because every grandchild is convinced that they are my favorite. And I'll tell you one of the greatest stories ever with one of my grandchildren. And now today he's married with a child. But when he was 8 years old, Avram Zelek, I'm a big, big believer in sports. And I'm a big believer that kids should play sports and excel in sports. All my kids excelled in sports, the boys, the girls. I have one daughter who couldn't play, but she became a great chef. She's in the kitchen. Yeah, she's fine. It's wonderful. But so my grandson, Avram, I told him, he was 8 years old. I said, listen, when you're ready, we're going to go buy your first baseball glove. We'll go together. And I said, just call me when you're ready. Next day he calls me, he said, Zaidi, I'm ready. Okay, so that was fast. Okay, so he lived in Kew Gardens, Avram Zelek Pfeiffer. And we went to Sports Authority on Metropolitan Avenue. Monstrous place. I never saw so many basketballs and footballs and baseballs and all kinds of gloves, catches, mitts, everything. How are you going to pick out a glove, So I remember when I was growing up, my first glove was a Wilson glove, Wilson. And I was so addicted to the smell of that leather. It was heavenly. Between pitches, I used to sniff it, like a drug addict. It was unbelievable. I loved it. So, okay, we're walking up and down the aisles. All of a sudden, I see a Wilson glove. I can't believe they're still making gloves. I pick it up. I smell it. It's the same smell that was when I was a kid. I said, Avram, this is your glove. He said, Zadie, how do you know? I said, smell it, you'll see. He doesn't know what I'm talking about. He puts on the glove, and I take a ball, and we throw it back and forth, and he catches everyone, and we buy it. Fine, buy the ball, buy the glove. 3 weeks later, one night, my wife comes home with the glove. I said, Mim, what are you doing with the glove? She said, Avram said you could have it tonight. He knows you like to smell it. So that's why he gave me the glove. So I should be able to have it that night because he knows I like to smell it. So, these things happen. If I gave him $25 to go buy a glove, it wouldn't happen.
Right. It's an experience. It's something that you
and not
have
only that,
to bond.
every single Friday, most of these grandchildren, they'll call me to say good Shabbos.
Do you still play ball? Do you still have a catch with them? Maybe?
Not so much. But they're all living in different places. But we always used to play basketball together.
Is that what do you say? Is that the trick to chinuch? Like,
I think one of the tricks to chinuch is to really love them and really be interested in what they're doing.
Like that
and
new
to
book,
listen to them.
or the Retrink book. Just love them.
Just love them. That's right.
That's really best.
That's right.
Wow. I was talking to one of your sons when I was doing research, and he mentioned that your wife said that you're your best supporter in the way that you very often buy your own books, buy your own CDs, and you're talking to someone, you're like, oh, okay, you could have it. I want to give it to you.
It's true. I think that one of the most beautiful things is to be a giving person. When you're a giving person, you feel so good that you made somebody else feel special. And that's what I wrote in the book called The Glittering World of Chesed. If you don't have it, I'll be happy to send it to you. See that?
I think I once won a CD in Camp Monk one summer.
Yeah.
The person who knows the answer to this question gets a free CD.
Yeah. So in there I write that I think it's very important. That's what I said to the bar mitzvah boy last night, and his grandmother told me that he's starting it, that every person should have a notebook where they write down one chesed that they did for another person that day. Not, even if you did 10, don't write down 10 because you'll get disappointed. You can't do every day 10 chesed, especially not Shabbos and Yom Tov. Very, very difficult. But if you write down a chesed that you did for somebody every day, your life will change, because when you do for others, Hashem does for you.
Wow.
And when you become a giving person, people like you and they care for you, and it's really very special.
Are you allowed to count chasadim?
What?
Are you allowed to count chasadim, or is it?
Well, I don't count them. I just, just write down one.
It's funny you say that, literally, because when you got here, you got yourself ready in a different room. I told Nachi, and I've heard you speak before, and I said, you're very likable, and I think it's based on what you're saying now.
Yeah, you just try to be a giving person. Now, you know how many times I've complimented Nachi? I think he's one of the greatest human beings in Klal Yisrael.
Publicly, also, you made my face turn red.
Of course. Well, it's not hard with your red hair.
And he said something. Now, Rabbi Krohn, you once, I think it was in the Camp Monk dining room somewhere, you started singing my praises about Meaningful Minute in front of the whole camp. This was in the beginning,
right?
And
I remember Shalom Paysach once at the hotel.
Yes, and Shalom Paysach. And you said, now his hair is not the only thing that's red. Because I turned beet red. And
so any chance that you're going to have to bring up Nachi, but you need that little jab in there, I'll be there with you to help you out. If you need to call Yaakov, I'm there.
Yeah.
Some of the question we like to ask all our guests, I like to ask all our guests, Nachi hates it, is what is your favorite mitzvah? Everyone... The 613 mitzvahs.
Yeah. I was intrigued by that question. My wife said, tell them not to ask you that question.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, she's on Team Nachi.
Team Nachi.
What?
It's a hard question.
Nachi doesn't like when we ask that question.
Well, I didn't hear any of the other answers. I would love to hear what they say. But I'll tell you one mitzvah that just, to me, is so beautiful, and that is sitting in the sukkah. Sitting in the sukkah, the first night of Sukkot in Yerushalayim with your family, it's as close to Gan Eden as you can get.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't get through Shechianu without crying.
Really?
And Sukkot in Yerushalayim.
It's a good favorite mitzvah.
It's so beautiful. And then, even in Kew Gardens, when I love to sit in the sukkah, and you're surrounded by the walls. You feel Hashem is embracing you, and you got the Gedolim on the wall, you got the Kaisel on the wall. Now I have some people that I loved so much, they passed away. Moshe Chadash, who was like a brother to me, Rabbi Finkel. These are the holiest people in Yerushalayim. And they passed away within the last couple of years, but we have their picture up on the sukkah, so you feel you're just so embraced by the walls of the sukkah that you don't want to get out of there. Now, I know that I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I know that some people feel that you shouldn't read a newspaper in the sukkah because it's kind of secular. I can't get out of the sukkah. What should I tell you?
It's one of the mitzvahs you do with your entire guf.
Yeah, 100%.
Another question we introduced quite recently that Yaakov started asking, which I love. This is a Nachi approved question.
Okay, go for it.
Is who is one person that you can spend an hour with that is no longer around? If you could spend 1 hour with someone in history.
Question. I love that question. I think
who would that be? It's a tough one. We were talking amongst ourselves yesterday.
And
we tried answering that, but what do you say?
If I could, there are a few people, but the first one would be Rashi.
Rashi?
Say more.
Rashi. The reason I would love to speak to Rashi, because he knew everything. He could explain every pasuk. He could explain every Gemara.
You have 1 hour with him. Is that enough? 1 hour?
Yeah. Sure. I would ask him about life. I think he was the wisest person that connected to Klal Yisrael. He's our Rebbe. You know what Rashi stands for? It's not only Rab Shlomo Yitzchaki, it's Rabbon Shel Yisrael. He's the Rebbe of Klal Yisrael. So anything that you wanted to know, anything about a mitzvah, a hashkafa, whatever, Rashi was right there.
A bonus one.
Yeah.
Aside for Rashi, that's awesome.
Okay.
Who's one other person?
One gadol, or two gadol. One is Rabbi Paysach Krohn. Rabbi Paysach Krohn was the gadol hador together with the Chavetz Chaim, and he was like the Zaidi of Klal Yisrael, and he never had only one daughter. She passed away young, but the whole Klal Yisrael was on his shoulders. So again, any responsibility, any leadership question that you would have, he would be able to guide you how to be a proper leader in Klal Yisrael. I would love to spend time with
something amazing to think about, no? To think about the answer of that question. Who would you want to spend
time with? Yeah. You know who would also be very fascinating? David HaMelech. Because he went through so much.
Could you see yourself, like we were discussing yesterday, saying, we were saying names more maybe contemporary. We tried saying, how about Yosef Atzadik? But it's hard to, picture sitting down with someone like that. I don't know.
Yeah, it would definitely be difficult. But totally. And in regards to David HaMelech, you're saying, he went through such a hard life.
He had 3 children that Nebuch went off the derech. 2 of them wanted to kill him.
Tried killing him, yeah.
And he was so inspirational. There's Perek Nun Aleph, in Tillim that he wrote about doing tshuva. He went through difficult times. And yet he's a leader of Klal Yisrael till this very day. We're still saying Tillim every day. For David HaMelech, like what made him tick? How did he withstand? His brothers didn't like him. His father didn't even think that he was special at one point. And Shaul HaMelech certainly didn't like him. And yet he overcame all this. How do you do that?
So Mirza Hashem, we should have that opportunity soon to ask these questions.
Yeah. To have them on the show?
Yeah.
Well,
that could be cool.
I wasn't thinking like that, but I'll take that as well.
It's so funny you mentioned that because I think even, the non-Jewish world, they understand David HaMelech as they know the story of David and Goliath.
Yes,
he's the epitome of the underdog. And come on, I don't know if he could, and just throughout his entire life, and he just proves everyone wrong. Like, nope, I'm persistent. I could do it.
Right.
Everyone knows you as the king of stories, and you have thousands of stories. Is there one particular story that
tugs at your heart,
changes you? And I'm sure there's a few, but what's one that maybe you could share with us now?
I'll tell you, people ask me, like, what is the story that you love to tell the most, or what affects people the most? So there are 2 stories. There's one, I may have told it in Camp Monk, about Shaya. About that kid who, it happened here in Far Rockaway, actually. A boy who is mentally challenged. And Rabbi Bender had him in Darkei Torah, a couple times a week. But basically he went to a Petach school. And he wanted to come on Sunday to play baseball with the kids. Now, how are they going to choose him in? The kid doesn't even know how to hold a bat. His father told me this story. And I've seen grown men cry at this story. And so it was, the 7th inning, and his father comes and he asks one of the kids who's playing, can my son Shia get into the game? And they were losing, the guys who he had asked, and they said, okay, good, let him play short center field or whatever. They gave him a glove, he put it on backwards or whatever. And he said, we're trying to get him up. And
He
now,
probably smelled the glove, yeah.
What?
He probably smelled the glove also.
Yeah,
right?
probably.
You're gonna get that list.
But anyway, so what happened was that they put him up, and this team started catching up. Now, when they said they were going to put him up, they thought, they're still going to be 7 runs behind. But now they're 6 runs. They caught up, and they got men on base, and it's 2 outs. It's the bottom of the 9th, and he was not up yet. But they promised him to be up. So they put him up. And, the pitcher who I spoke to, realized this kid doesn't even know how to hold a bat. So he walked in a little bit, to let him try at least to hit the ball. And he swung, and he couldn't. So somebody got up together with him to hold a bat. And the second pitch, they swung and missed. And the third pitch, they hit a little grounder to the pitcher. Now, the pitcher knew in a second he could throw to first base. And the kid's out in the end, the game's over. But what the pitcher did was the most ingenious thing. He took the ball and he threw it into right field. And everybody started yelling, Shia, run to first. Shia, run to first. In his life, he never ran to first. He runs to first. And then all of a sudden now the right fielder begins to realize, I know why the pitcher did this. So he takes the ball. He's got the ball, right? And everybody's yelling, Shia, run to second. Then they turn him around, and he's running to second. He doesn't know what goes after that. And the right fielder takes the ball, and he throws it over the third baseman's head. And now everybody's yelling. And all the kids, his teammates, are running behind Shia from second to third. Shia, run to third. And then they turn him around. Shia, run home. Shia, run home. And he runs home, and he hits the grand slam, and everybody picks him up, and they make him the hero. And everybody realizes that they reached their perfection that day. Because the father, when he told the story, he said, I always wondered, where is the perfection? Everything that Hashem does is with perfection. How could he make a son like mine, like Shia? And he said, that's the answer. Because he brought out the perfection in other people. Because they did that unbelievable thing to show him that he could be a hero.
It was done by kids. That's amazing.
What?
And it was done by kids. It was kids who thought about doing that.
That's right.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's just absolute. And there's some people who made a movie out of that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's a really
Different
beautiful
people,
story.
yeah.
Wow.
That's one story that, when you really get into it, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And there's another story, which is such a sad story, but no question about it. I've had the great chance to speak on the Chavetz Chaim Heritage
Foundation,
the Tisha B'Av videos that are seen by 60, 70,000 people around the world. But this story definitely had the most effect ever. It was a story about a couple who had a decent marriage, and he was more meticulous than she was. So Saturday night, if she didn't clean up the dishes, and she was going to leave it till Sunday morning, he would say, how could you leave the dishes here over Motzei Shabbos? She would say, Zelo Chashuv, it's not that important. Don't make such a big deal about it. And, basically they got along with everything. But if, let's say, she was a few minutes late, they were going to a wedding, and she was late, she wasn't ready, he'd get upset, and she would say, Zelo Chashuv, it's not so important. And, that's how it was. Anyhow, she went up to the bungalow colonies, and he would come on Shabbos, like many people in New York do. And one Thursday, she called him up, and she said, please bring the checkbook. I have a lot of bills that I have to pay here in the mountains. So right away, he was very meticulous. He put the checkbook into his bag. And Friday morning, she called him again. She said, don't forget to bring the checkbook, because I have a lot of bills. He said, it's already in the bag. And when he came Friday, he gave it to her right away. First thing, gave her the bag with the checkbook. And the next morning, Shabbos morning, when he woke up, he realized that she just took the bag and she put it on the baby's crib, on the post of the baby's crib, and the checkbook was still in there. She made 2 long-distance calls, right? She called him Thursday, she called him Friday, and he was so upset because what she makes such a big deal about, she didn't even touch the checkbook. But he wasn't going to ruin the Shabbos, and it wasn't going to ruin the weekend because he's only there for the weekend. Fine. He didn't say anything, and he went back on Sunday afternoon. The next Friday, he comes up. The checkbook is still in that bag on the baby's crib. And he was livid. But he figured, he just comes up for Shabbos, he's going to make a big deal. So he didn't say anything. And then he went back again on Sunday. On Tuesday, he got a frantic call. She was expecting their 7th or 8th kid, that she was rushed to the hospital. And then he has to come up. It's very, very dangerous. And when he came up to Harris Hospital from New York, it took 2 hours to get there, all his friends and relatives were in the lobby, and they told her that Nebuchadnezzar died in childbirth. And he was devastated. He couldn't believe it. And they all went back with him to his bungalow colony. And when he came into the room, he saw that checkbook in that bag, still there. And he took out the checkbook. And the first check he wrote was for the Chaver Kadisha. And the second check that he wrote was for the funeral. And when he came home to Brooklyn to sit Shiva, he took that bag with the checkbook and he hung it on his closet. And on the outside of the bag, he wrote 3 words, Zelo Chashuv. It's not that important. And I always say that lesson that he learned in death, we have to learn in life before it's too late. Because most of the arguments at home and most of the arguments either with the spouse or the children are petty things that are really Zelo Chashuv. And it's not really worth it. And there were so many people who called after that speech that they wanted to hear that again. And we made a little poster, like a 5x7 poster called Zelo Chashuv. And we sent out hundreds and hundreds of them. I gave out hundreds, many, many speeches. And that really, so many people told me they put it up on their refrigerator, on their phones or whatever. Because really, many of the arguments are really Zelo Chashuv. It's not really that important. And we just get carried away.
Well, that gave you the chills.
I saw that.
You didn't see that coming, did you?
Yeah. Wow. Yes. Thank you so much for coming in and spending this time with us and letting us into your life and taking time out of your super busy schedule. We really appreciate you.
I hope it's okay. Listen, you guys are doing a great thing. People see... I was watching even Benny Friedman and Charlie Harari just for a few seconds because it was very late already at night.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. It's just amazing. It's a great idea.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And again, the meaningful minute is, how many people? 50,000, you said?
Just about.
I know.
And we, I think by the time people are going to be hearing this, we're going to already have crossed over 50,000 downloads on our podcast.
Really?
On the Meaningful People podcast, we have over...
On the Meaningful People, really?
We have over 50,000 downloads.
Yeah.
So
this is called a podcast?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a podcast. Some people are going to be either listening to this on their phones on the podcast or watching it on YouTube, which we have over 26,000.
But yeah, this is...
a podcast you can't watch. You mean you just hear that?
Technically, a podcast is, you could just listen to it. But
what is that, on your app?
It's going to actually...
It's going to be on the app, but it's also on Apple Podcasts,
you
on
can find
Spotify, on Android phones, on Google Podcasts. And so we also video it, put on YouTube if someone wants to watch it.
Right.
But yeah, it's really... Thank you so much for coming in. And I guess...
My pleasure.
Just to end it off, is there... what's next? Is there a book coming out?
Baruch Hashem, because the Haggadah, was so well accepted, so ArtScroll asked me to write on Elul, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, this type of book, where it would be stories on the different al-chaitz, on tshuva, tefillah, tzedakah, on things in Elul, forgiveness, patronas, things like that. So it's not going to be a commentary on the slichas or the machzor,
right?
But the working title is the Maggid on the machzor, but it's not going to be on the machzor only, But different stories.
Okay, everyone have your eyes open for that.
And just to cap it off, something we sometimes do with guests. The whole podcast, I'm thinking really back to when you were 21 years old and you were 22 years old and you walked in and, someone said something to you that you could have possibly stopped being a mile at that point. For anybody listening who perhaps is trying to pursue something but, has negative feedback or they heard some negative feedback, what can you tell them?
I'll tell you what I would tell them. The Tzidkas HaTzadik, Rab Tzadik, said there's 3 things you got to believe in. You got to believe in Hashem, you got to believe in Torah, and you got to believe in yourself. And if you believe in yourself, you will not let anybody divert you. Because whoever that person is probably not going to be with you for the rest of your life anyway. So, it's a temporary thing. There are many, many, many people that are jealous. Anybody that's successful, has to deal with that. People that are jealous, people that are criticizing because they can't climb the ladder of success, so they just want to rip down those that are on the top. So if somebody has a great idea and somebody is knocking it for no reason, it's probably because they're jealous or because they didn't think of it. So you can't listen. Like Rabbi Wein said, if you're going to worry about criticism, you'll never accomplish anything. And there's so much to accomplish in the world. Look at you guys.
Oh, well, I don't know about that. Look at you.
Thank you so much.
Oh,
Thank you.
pleasure. My pleasure.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of the Meaningful People podcast. We sure did.
I feel like that's like your robot. Like, we sure did.
What am I supposed to say? If
I
you
don't
guys
know.
are going to make an outro to a podcast that someone just listened to.
Yeah, give us suggestions.
It was so good. It was such a great podcast.
Yeah, Rabbi Krohn is
I was just making fun of
amazing.
myself, but yeah, keep going.
Oh yeah, I love when you do that. Rabbi Krohn was amazing, as you can hear how he got started and just how he continues. And he's definitely not a young man. I have no clue. He's one of those people you can't tell how old he is.
He doesn't count anything.
But yeah, exactly. But he doesn't stop. Like, he just keeps on going and going.
I
He's
think
persistent.
I think it's so cool how his scheduling. He showed us, obviously, for people who are listening, you may not have seen it, but he showed us his book where he writes down everything, and his planner, and like, you'd think, oh, people do this on their phone. He does it on a notebook. You know, it's really, really cool. He's someone who's super organized. He gets up to speak. He knows exactly what he's saying, when he's saying, where he's sourcing, and he's an emotional person.
Yeah.
You know, we got a little bit deep with him, and I just felt it was a great episode.
Yeah, he was great. And in terms of, I think he's world famous. Everyone knows who he is. So if you know anyone who's ever heard him speak and want to give more background about who he is and what he's about and what makes him tick, please share this podcast episode with them. That would mean the world to us.
We will see you soon. Ciao.